Let's dive into a fascinating topic and break down the current situation. Looking back at Donald Trump's maneuvers in the Middle East, many people point out two glaring issues. First, he lacked broad international support. Whether you look at the UN Security Council or international law, his positions were often hard to justify. Second, he didn't have the genuine backing of his allies. Look at Europe. The EU and NATO talked a big game, but when it came time to actually commit, everyone was incredibly cautious. Why? It's simple. Everyone was just spectating. The mindset was basically, this doesn't directly involve me, so there's no need for me to jump into the fire. Many countries were perfectly happy watching from the sidelines. Take South Korea and Japan, for example. They were far more pragmatic. They had to ask themselves, if the US doesn't actually finish the job, who is going to deal with the consequences of offending Iran? So, initially, most chose to stay still. Japan even cited constitutional restrictions as a reason they couldn't intervene militarily. Eventually, they sent some minesweepers, a purely symbolic gesture just to show they were participating. At its core, it was opportunistic. They didn't want to upset the US, but they certainly didn't want to get dragged into a war. There's also an even more extreme narrative floating around online. Some suggest that Taiwan should send warships to the Middle East to fight alongside the US, arguing that this would guarantee American help if something ever happens to Taiwan. It sounds heroic, but reality isn't that romantic. International politics is always driven by interests, not emotions. Now, let's address a viral rumor that's been making the rounds. The story goes that Xi Jinping made a move by providing Iran with long-range missiles with a 4,000 kilometers range, enough to cover all of Europe, including the UK, France, and Germany. The story claims Iran actually fired these at a military base in the Indian Ocean, but the missiles malfunctioned and crashed into the sea before reaching the target, prompting the US Navy to rush in to salvage the wreckage for study. We have to be clear here. This narrative is filled with massive exaggerations and inaccuracies. The reality is that while Iran's missile technology is real, its performance and stability are constantly debated. There is zero reliable evidence to support the claim of 4,000 kilometers precision strikes on Europe. Furthermore, international disputes over missile ranges, usually capped around the 2,000 kilometers mark by various protocols, have existed for a long time. In other words, this sounds more like a storytime version of events that has been distorted through internet echo chambers. However, one thing is certain. If the situation truly escalates, the attitude of European nations will shift instantly. If they perceive a genuine direct threat, the NATO framework can mobilize very quickly into a multinational coalition. We've seen similar patterns throughout history. To sum it all up, on the surface, this looks like a conflict between the US and Iran. But behind the scenes, every country is calculating its own interests. No one wants to be the first to jump in, but the moment the risk expands to a certain point, alliances form overnight. In international politics, it's never about who is in charge. It's about whose interests are at stake and who can minimize their risk.